It's been a long time, and I promise we'll catch up soon, but I want to talk about the Faerie night. The first thing I want to show you is the digital sketching. This was at a time when I was trying to do a little bit of sketching every day, so the first thing you see here are experiments that I was doing to try to figure out what I wanted to draw. I decided I wanted to do something with a really cool border, and here's the border frames and a couple little sketches I was testing out. I still like those, but I didn't use them. Eventually, I made a little collage, which I used to sort of get me started on the picture that I had in my head. And here you can see I started sketching over that little collage, and we have the beginnings of what ended up being the Faerie night. Here you can see I'm refining some of the areas, making faces on the armor, and adding sort of like hair and things like that. And when I got it to a point where I was like, I like where this is, I added a white layer with the opacity turned down, which kind of acts like digital vellum for me. And then over that, I drew a more complete and detailed sketch. I also did the border. And from there, I played a little bit with color because I had no idea what I wanted to do with color. And I had decided that I liked purple. I didn't go as saturated as this. I decided it was best to do some traditional color studies. So the first thing I'm doing here is selecting my colors that I want to use for the color palettes. I wanted to use something neutral, something earthy and green, and something with pink and purple. Here you can see me selecting the colors from all these color swatches that I've made. I have a whole organization system for my watercolors. You can see there's like little codes in the corner of every swatch, which helps me find the pans that I need. In order to make the little mock-up there, I had done a final drawing by printing out my digital sketch, doing a pencil drawing on vellum over my digital sketch, scanning in my pencil drawing, and then printing it out at a small scale on some cheap watercolor paper. This is really convenient because I can print as many as I want, do as many color studies as I want, without having to trace over my own work over and over again. For this particular color study, I wanted to do something a little more earthy, so you can see me blocking in some neutral colors, some sort of very gray browns, straight up grays, and then I move into a very, very bright yellowish green, which I tone down with some more earthy browns and reds. And you get this kind of green gold color. So here are my 3 color studies, and I'm on to the final piece. For this, I printed out my pencil sketch that I had scanned in, or pencil drawing, and I printed it out onto a nicer watercolor paper to start off with. I knew I was going to end up going over all of these lines, so I'm not concerned about the ink fading with time. It's not even going to be visible in the final painting. Also, the printer I have has archival ink. The ink doesn't run or anything like that, so I haven't had any issues with it. It's a question I get asked a lot, but it works really well for me. So here I'm mixing some colors for the lichen and the little crusties in the background there. And I believe the colors I am using are Perylene Maroon, Undersea Green, Burnt Orange, and Raw Umber Violet. Perylene Maroon might not even be in there. It might be all Raw Umber Violet that is the reddish color. But here you can see I'm just moving in and filling in little tiny details bit by bit, In the beginning, it's very slow. It's just little tiny washes, defining certain shapes, and I don't want to go too dark too fast for this piece, and I'm going to build the watercolor up slowly until I eventually feel like I'm at a point where I'm going to switch over to acrylic gouache. Here, this color I'm mixing, there's definitely some perylene maroon, some raw umber violet, and probably a little perylene green to sort of mute down the red. There were so many details in this piece. I had to do a really careful job of deciding what details I wanted to get into and what I wanted to leave a little more empty. Obviously, I kind of love details. They're very relaxing and meditative for me. And also I feel like there's something about creating so many details that is a little overstimulating and psychedelic in a way. So sometimes I love to just fill things with little details. And you know, if you spend a long time looking, you can find all sorts of weird little things. That brings me a lot of joy. In this piece, I did get pretty detailed, but I was careful about the level of detail I went into and the value. I didn't want too much contrast in the border itself because I didn't want it to take away from the image in the centerpiece here. So the highest levels of contrast in the end are around that little will-o'-the-wisp fairy at the top of the skull, a little bit in the eye area, and then I think that's it. There's like little bits and highlights here and there, like the little eyes on the armor. As we're watching these details come in here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the paper and other mediums I'm using for this piece. The paper is Arch's hot press watercolor paper, I think 140 pounds, and I tended to use hot press paper in the past because it's nice and smooth, and I was afraid more textured paper would eat up my details. But lately I've turned to cold press, and I actually really love the velvety quality of the more textured paper, and it doesn't eat my details too much. For the brushes, I'm primarily using Rosemary and Company brushes. I used to use a different brand, but the quality just dropped a couple years ago, and I needed to find something new to replace them, and I had heard good things about this brand, and they are pretty great. I really like them. So if you're looking for new brushes, Rosemary and Company are great. And then for paints, for the watercolor specifically, I'm mostly using Daniel Smith, but I also have Turner watercolor and Winsor & Newton watercolor. I'd love to experiment more with some of the homemade watercolor brands out there, but I've already gathered quite a collection of watercolor, and I'm trying not to purchase a lot of new colors until I've gone through some of what I already have. And finally, for the acrylic gouache, which we'll get to soon, I use mostly Turner acrylic gouache, although I do have some Holbein. I just don't love the Holbein acrylic gouache as much because I find some of the colors are very chalky. Some are totally fine, but especially the pastels tend to have this quality to them that I really dislike. But Turner has really done a good job with their acrylic gouache, and I love some of the colors that they have available, especially the hot pink, which I don't use in this, but I've used in several Magic the Gathering pieces that I've done the past couple years. So this is actually the only piece I made in 2022. only personal piece, I should say. I did a lot of client work, but I was dealing with a lot of burnout really badly from my tarot deck. And just the amount of work that went into packaging and shipping and doing customer service for all of that. It was a lot, and my creativity just nosedived, and I was just feeling kind of like, I guess, creatively broken, creatively spent. I really didn't do a lot of work, and I spent a lot of 2022 just trying to recover from that. So I didn't force myself to make any work that, that I wasn't doing solely for myself. So if I was like, oh, I gotta make content for social media, no, we weren't doing that. In fact, I think I maybe posted 20 times on Instagram in 2022. So this piece was just pure enjoyment, and I spent a long time working on it. It took me, I think, over a year to do the whole thing. And that was because I put it aside for months at a time when I was busy with client work, or when I just was really deep in the burnout and I just didn't have the whatever creative spark, fire that I usually have. It's just the creative well was empty, and I decided to not force anything and just, do this piece as I had time and motivation to do it. And I think that it was really worth me taking my time. And when I did complete it, I felt really, really good. And I finished it around the time that I felt like I was actually really starting to recover from burnout, and creativity was kind of, I guess, visiting me more often. And now we're in the new year, and I feel really good about my creativity, and I feel like I'm pretty much recovered from burnout, but I do need to be careful. I have some personal projects coming up, and I'm posting pretty regularly again, and I'm really excited to share new personal work with folks, because I feel like I've been kind of hiding for a long time, just trying to feel better. Doing all the little details on these mushrooms was one of the most indulgent pieces of this painting. I love painting little mushrooms, and I love the little crusties, crusties and mushies. They're the best. They're very relaxing to paint, and they're just really cool. It's always nice to go for walks in the woods in the fall back in my hometown, and there's this place that is just, it's always covered with mushrooms. And over the pandemic, since I've last made a video here, I have found some really cool mushrooms in there, including a stinkhorn, which I've never seen out in the wild before. So that was thrilling, and you could smell it. I could smell it long before we found it. And it was just really cool. It was really cool. I also find a lot of coral mushrooms and boar's head tooth, and one of my absolute favorite mushrooms is the viscid violet court. And the periwinkle color on that mushroom has been a bit of an inspiration for the color palettes I've been using lately. During the pandemic, we also adopted this cat. We call her Baby, even though her name is Gideon, and she shows up a lot in my streams to bother me. So just a little treat for you. And so between the last clip and this clip, a lot of time passed where I wasn't streaming, so I don't have a lot of video. But here you can see that I have moved into acrylic gouache. I have the center taped over because I finished the acrylic gouache part on that section, and I was working on the border, and I didn't want to get my hand all over the center and smudge anything or spill anything. So I have a little piece of vellum taped over it. And again, I'm back working on those mushrooms, just with little details in the acrylic wash. I'm adding some highlights, smoothing out some other places. And I'm trying to keep a little bit of that periwinkle color and that warm gray. And here's where I did something kind of scary. I wasn't liking the face, and it stood out way too much. So I decided to do some washes to darken it up and to repaint the face. Sometimes you just have to do something scary that, you're like, okay, this part isn't working, but if I try to fix it, I might destroy the whole painting. Do I want to do that? Sometimes you just gotta do it. So I did some washes. Obviously, I didn't go too dark or harsh with them because when you are making a big change like that, doing it to a certain extent can be corrected. If you go too far, it'll just take a lot more correction. Another thing that I like about acrylic wash is that it's opaque, and so if you make a mistake, you can paint over it. It's a lot more forgiving than watercolor can be. And in sections like this where I get a little scared, it's really nice to know that, it might take some work, but I can recover it if I do mess up. Thankfully, this whole section worked out. It took a little layers and playing around with it, but I was happy with it in the end. And I think it looked a lot better than it did before I decided to fix it up. I was really happy when I finished this piece, and this is pretty close to the end here. I added some metallic silver to the border areas, and that was where I wrapped it up. And finally completing a piece that was a personal piece after so long, and having it be a piece that really felt like a level up and felt like the work that I wanted to be making really helped me get over the final bump of burnout. So I'm happy to be back. I hope to be making videos again, and if you want to see more behind the scenes stuff or learn more about the art materials I'm using or what I'm reading, where I'm getting inspiration, you can join me over on Patreon. No matter what level you pledge at, you get to see all my posts, and it helps me, especially going into doing some more personal projects this year, it helps me focus on those. So I'm excited to be back, and I hope to see you over there. You can join in the Discord, come chat and share your work, and yeah, hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.